The year was 1305, and the streets of London buzzed with the shouts of merchants pitching their goods and the sound of horse hooves striking the cobblestones. But on this solemn morning, a very different noise would soon fill the air. It was the roar of a ravenous crowd gathering to witness what would become one of history's most infamous executions. The man destined to face death before them was William Wallace, the Scottish knight who dared to resist the English monarch and rally his countrymen against foreign domination. What unfolded that day was far from a mere execution. It was a meticulously planned spectacle of cruelty meant to destroy not only a man, but the powerful symbol he embodied. Popular portrayals, shaped by films and romantic stories, have softened Wallace's last moments into a portrayal of a swift and honorable death for a valiant hero. However, the truth was far grimmer and brutally unforgiving. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, devised Wallace's punishment not just as vengeance, but as a terrifying message to resonate through the ages. The sentence was hanging, drawing, and quartering, a penalty reserved exclusively for traitors and regarded as the utmost extreme of medieval English judicial harshness. This was not simply about ending a life. It was an intentional dismantling of human dignity in the most public and violent way imaginable. The complete destruction of hope and the creation of a terrifying spectacle would haunt Scotland's shared memory for centuries ahead. Today, we dismantle the legend and confront the harsh truth of William Wallace's last moments. To fully grasp the horror of Wallace's execution, we must first understand the environment that led to it. Medieval Scotland during the late 13th and early 14th centuries was a land caught between freedom and domination. The idea of a nation was still evolving, while loyalty was often shaped more by survival than by true allegiance. The Scottish Wars of Independence erupted after a crisis over succession, and Edward I saw a chance to bring Scotland under direct English rule. He regarded the Northern Kingdom not as an independent state, but merely as a rebellious region. William Wallace rose from this turmoil not as a nobleman seeking authority, but as a small landowner motivated by personal tragedy and fierce national anger. His family had suffered greatly under English control, and when he led his forces at Stirling Bridge in 1297, it was with the rage of a man who had lost everything and the determination of one who envisioned a free Scotland. His victory was not only strategic, but also deeply symbolic, showing that English heavy cavalry could be overcome and that Scottish freedom was not an impossible dream. Edward I was a ruler who never tolerated resistance, infamous for his brutal treatment of Welsh uprisings and the removal of Jews from England was a significant event. John understood that rebellion resembled a fire that could quickly spread if it was not fully extinguished. Wallace's achievements needed not only to be undone, but also turned into a warning for others. The English king had to prove that defying his power would bring consequences so harsh they would discourage future generations from even thinking about resisting. The political environment of the year 1305 played a vital role in comprehending Wallace's destiny. By this period, most Scottish nobles had accepted Edward's control, viewing submission as a better option than destruction. Wallace's ongoing defiance made him not just an adversary of England, but also a source of shame for the Scottish elite who had chosen compliance. Capturing him became a top priority for reasons beyond the battlefield, reflecting political urgency. His very survival questioned the validity of Scotland's surrender. The search for William Wallace spanned several years and involved a vast network of spies, informants, and collaborators. Edward placed a large reward on Wallace's capture, and the English government in Scotland worked diligently to cut him off from any allies. Slowly the trap closed as former friends abandoned him, motivated by fear, greed, or simply the need to live in a world where being linked to Wallace was equal to certain death. The betrayal came, as it frequently does in such tales, from someone close. This occurred in August of 1305. William was most likely captured near Glasgow due to the betrayal of Sir John Mont, a Scottish knight who had pledged loyalty to English rule. The precise details remain a topic of debate among historians, but the result was unquestionable. The man who had become the emblem of Scottish defiance was now in English custody. His capture was hailed in London as a significant conquest, yet for Edward IV, it marked only the start of what he planned as William's ultimate disgrace. The journey from Scotland to London was a form of torment meant to shatter William's resolve even before his final punishment. Bound and closely watched, he was showcased through English towns, where crowds assembled to witness the notorious Scottish insurgent. This was psychological warfare, at its most deliberate, a hero reduced to a spectacle, a leader diminished to mere spectacle and oddity. By the time William arrived in London, he had already suffered weeks of humiliation, but his trial was only beginning. William Wallace's trial was a sham of justice, yet it fulfilled a critical role in English propaganda. Held at Westminster Hall on the 23rd of August, 1305, the hearing was conducted entirely in Latin, a tongue William most likely did not comprehend. He faced accusations of treason, murder, sacrilege, arson, and other crimes against the English crown. The irony was evident to those watching, since William was charged with betraying a king he never recognized as his ruler. The chance to speak was given to Wallace. He reportedly stated that he could not be accused of treason against Edward I because he had never been Edward's subject. This bold reply sealed his destiny, although in reality the verdict had already been decided. The trial was merely a spectacle aimed at giving a legal appearance to what was essentially a foreordained execution. Every judge was appointed by Edward I and had no desire to show leniency towards the man who had become the emblem of Scottish defiance. The accusations against Wallace were carefully constructed to legitimize the harshness of his punishment. Treason was considered the gravest crime and was punishable by the most dreadful method: hanging, drawing, and quartering. Additional charges of murder and sacrilege, referring to his assaults on English soldiers and clergy, aimed to depict him as a criminal rather than a freedom fighter. The English legal framework had become an instrument of state terror, with Wallace as its prime victim. The sentence was delivered with a ceremonial solemnity. Wallace was to be dragged through the streets of London, hanged by the neck but not until death, then disemboweled while still alive, beheaded, and finally his body divided into 4 parts. Each part of this punishment carried symbolic significance. The drawing signified his humiliation, the hanging represented his rejection by heaven, the disembowelment indicated his spiritual corruption, and quartering symbolized his total destruction. This was not simply an execution, but a calculated message to all who would challenge authority. The morning of August the 23rd, 1305, broke clear and warm in London. The city had been gearing up for this event for several days, with scaffolding constructed and crowds assembling from all across England to watch the death of the Scottish rebel. The officials transformed Wallace's execution into a public celebration, complete with vendors offering food and beverages to the gathered audience. This was not merely an act of justice but entertainment, a vivid demonstration of the English crown's authority and the destiny awaiting anyone who dared to oppose it. Wallace was first stripped bare and tied to a hurdle, a wooden frame designed to be dragged along the streets of London. The path was meticulously chosen to maximize both his humiliation and the spectacle. Beginning at the Tower of London, where he had been imprisoned, the procession wound through the most crowded areas of the city to ensure the largest possible audience witnessed his disgrace. The cobblestones scraped his skin as horses pulled him along, leaving a trail of blood marking his final passage. The throngs lining the roads were a blend of curious onlookers, English patriots, and those who took grim pleasure in watching suffering. Executions in medieval times served as public spectacles, combining entertainment with harsh reminders of royal power. The spectators shouted insults and threw refuse at Wallace as he went by, their conduct encouraged by the authorities who sought to make his last moments as degrading as possible. The level of humiliation was extreme, as this represented cruelty endorsed by the state on a vast scale. The procession advanced at a slow pace to maximize the time for onlookers to gather and to extend Wallace's agony. Contemporary records portray him as aware throughout the entire ordeal, his gaze fixed on a distant point as if perceiving something beyond the immediate tragedy of his circumstance. Whether this expression signified defiance, acceptance, or mere shock is still unclear, but observers emphasized that he never shouted or pleaded for mercy. This detail later became a defining part of his legacy. At Smithfield, London's conventional execution site, a scaffold was specially constructed for Wallace's execution. The assembled crowd was even larger and more raucous than along the path, with vendors offering pies and ale to attendees who had secured prime viewing spots many hours before. The festive atmosphere was intentional. English authorities aimed for Wallace's execution to be seen not as martyrdom, but as a triumphant display of English law and authority. The executioner, a seasoned professional likely responsible for numerous deaths, began his grim task with unsettling precision. Wallace was initially hanged by the neck, yet the noose was arranged to cause strangulation instead of a swift death through a broken neck. The spectators witnessed his desperate fight for air, his face turning violet and his body convulsing in the universal final struggle caused by suffocation, just as consciousness. As his strength began to wane, he was struck down, yet remained alive and fully conscious of the events unfolding around him. What followed was the most gruesome part of the entire ordeal. While William was still awake, the executioner started the gruesome task of removing his internal organs. Using a sharp blade, he carefully sliced open the abdomen and began extracting the organs one after another. Eyewitnesses described William's screams as unlike anything they had ever encountered, a sound expressing the deepest human agony. The executioner displayed each organ to the crowd before casting it into a fire that had been specially prepared. This act of burning William's entrails was deeply symbolic. In medieval beliefs, the bowels were thought to be the center of feeling and kindness. By roasting them in front of William, the executioner was deliberately destroying his humanity, reducing him to something less than human in the eyes of the watchers. The air was thick with the stench of burning flesh and organs, adding an extra layer of horror to an already terrifying scene. Throughout this torment, William stayed awake, his eyes open and alert even as his body was dismantled. Some reports claim he kept speaking, though what he said has been lost over time. The executioner's grim expertise was not only in inflicting extreme agony, but also in prolonging life so that death arrived as a release rather than the end of suffering. At last, mercifully, the executioner took action. To finish his gruesome task, William's head was severed with a single swing of a sharp axe, finally ending his agony. Yet even in death, the disgrace did not end. The head was briefly lifted for the crowd to witness, blood still dripping from the freshly cut neck, before being set aside for future exhibition. Then the body was divided into 4 parts, each segment displayed to the onlookers like pieces of meat in a butcher's shop. The handling of William's remains was as deliberate as the manner of his execution. His head was dipped in tar to preserve it and placed on a spike atop London Bridge, where it stayed for many years as a warning to anyone who might dare defy English rule. Meanwhile, the 4 sections of his body were sent to various Scottish cities, Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth, where they were shown publicly as grim reminders of the fate that awaited traitors. This distribution was more than savage cruelty. It was a political message. Each body part was intended to send a signal to local communities, a concrete reminder of English power and the terrible price of rebellion. The English recognized that symbols could wield immense influence, and William's dismembered corpse became a representation of English supremacy over Scotland. The immediate result following William's execution was precisely what Edward I had desired. The brutal display achieved its objective. Scottish resistance appeared to falter in the face of such ruthless intimidation. The sight of such an overwhelming display of English authority caused many supporters of Wallace to either flee their homeland or accept English control. Believing that no cause deserved such a gruesome death, the execution effectively turned a symbol of defiance into a cautionary tale against rebellion. However, Edward I had underestimated how the Scots would react to Wallace's martyrdom. Instead of quashing Scottish resistance, the cruelty of Wallace's death actually intensified it. The sheer horror of his execution became a powerful call to arms for those unwilling to submit to English rule. Robert the Bruce, who would later rise as King of Scotland, was reportedly inspired to take action by witnessing the harsh reality of Wallace's fate. He recognized in this event the true nature of English governance. Moreover, the way Wallace died shaped the strategies of subsequent Scottish fighters. It became obvious that falling into English hands meant experiencing unimaginable torture and disgrace. This awareness led to a more fierce and resolute kind of warfare in which Scottish warriors chose death in combat over surrender. Consequently, Wallace's execution gave rise to a culture where no mercy was expected or granted. The political effects of this event reached far beyond Scotland. Other European monarchies observed Wallace's execution with a mix of fascination and alarm. They saw it as a clear example of English tactics that could easily be directed against them as well. The brutality of the execution sent a chilling message across the continent about the lengths to which England was willing to go to maintain control. This episode became a significant element of England's identity, contributing to the isolation that would later make English foreign relations more challenging. Edward I's demonstration of power was unmistakably clear, yet it was also accompanied by a display of brutality. Historical records related to Wallace's execution are abundant, derived from various contemporary sources that offer a surprisingly thorough account of the event. The Lanos Chronicle, authored by English monks, recounts the execution with precise detail, noting the audience's reaction and the length of Wallace's suffering. Although these narratives are inclined to favor the English viewpoint, they still provide important insight into medieval perceptions of justice and punishment. On the other hand, Scottish sources, though less common, present an alternative view of the execution. The Chronicle of John of Foran depicts Wallace as a martyr who faced death with honor and bravery, highlighting his steadfastness in refusing to plead for mercy or abandon his cause. These stories, which may be somewhat idealized, illustrate how Wallace's death deeply influenced Scottish national identity and transformed a military setback into a triumph of spirit. The official legal documents from Wallace's trial and execution perhaps offer the most impartial perspective on the case. Kept in the English National Archives, these records show the meticulous organization involved in both the trial and execution. Every aspect was recorded, including the accusations against Wallace and the handling of his remains. The English authorities appeared to recognize the historical importance of their actions. Eyewitness reports from both English and Scottish spectators offer further insight into the execution. Some depict the crowd's ruthless eagerness, while others observe the composed manner in which William Wallace faced his fate. These contrasting viewpoints reveal the event's complexity and the varied significance it held for different groups. William Wallace's execution left a legacy that reached far beyond the immediate political aftermath. Over the following centuries, his tale evolved into a cornerstone myth of Scottish identity, motivating countless Scots to oppose foreign rule. The sheer savagery of his death elevated him from a defeated insurgent to a powerful emblem of sacrifice and defiance, a symbol whose influence grew stronger after death than during his life. Furthermore, this execution played a role in shaping international law and ideas about human rights. Subsequent legal thinkers cited Wallace's treatment as a case of judicial barbarity, violating essential human dignity. The concept that even adversaries of the state deserved fundamental humane treatment began to develop partly as a response to such extreme acts. The cultural reverberations of Wallace's demise are evident in the arts, literature, and music produced in the centuries that followed. From medieval songs to contemporary movies, his narrative has continuously inspired creativity. Stories about William's sacrifice have been shared and interpreted anew by each generation. The scene of his execution, in particular, has evolved into a potent emblem of the conflict between oppression and liberty, as well as cruelty and fairness. The psychological effect on the Scottish people was deep and enduring. William's death caused a collective trauma that became an integral part of Scotland's cultural identity, a common experience of suffering that brought the nation together in a way that victories in battle alone could not accomplish. The terror surrounding his passing turned into a wellspring of resilience, showing that certain ideals deserved enduring hardship and that honor could be preserved even amid the most degrading circumstances. The chosen method of William's execution, hanging, drawing, and quartering, was itself a powerful message about the nature of medieval justice and the dynamics between ruler and subject. This brutal form of execution was exclusively reserved for traitors, those who betrayed the sacred trust linking monarch and subject. By applying this punishment to William, Edward the Fine sought to demonstrate that everyone in the British Isles was his subject, regardless of their recognition of his authority. The public spectacle of the execution held equal importance. Medieval justice acted as a theatrical drama intended to affirm social orders and political ties through grand displays. William's execution stood as perhaps the most intricate performance of its kind in that period, involving not only the physical annihilation of the condemned, but also a profound psychological impact on all who witnessed it. The crowd was not simply observing justice, but actively engaging in a ceremony of governmental authority. The meticulous recording of the execution shows that the English officials recognized they were creating a significant historical event. Every aspect, from the start of the procession to the handling of the body parts, was carefully documented, signifying that the moment was meant to be remembered. The execution aimed not only to punish Wallace, but to shape a story supporting English agendas for many years ahead. The global impact of the execution should not be underestimated. Medieval Europe was a closely connected world where news traveled rapidly and reputations held great weight. William Wallace's execution was seen by foreign representatives and reported widely across the continent, enhancing England's image as a nation ready to apply harsh measures to keep control. This reputation influenced diplomatic relationships for many decades following the event. Reflecting on the cruelty of William Wallace's death forces us to face unsettling realities about human nature and the use of power. The spectators who gathered to witness his agony were not monsters but ordinary individuals conditioned to accept and even take pleasure in the systematic destruction of a fellow human being. Their excitement over the spectacle exposes the dark potential for brutality within civilized society when it receives official sanction. The approval of the execution also reveals how rapidly the extraordinary can turn into the ordinary. The executioner who dismembered Wallace was a professional, highly skilled in extending pain. The officials who arranged the event were bureaucrats, merely following the accepted procedures for handling traitors. This acceptance of extreme cruelty as normal is perhaps even more unsettling than the cruelty itself, implying that civilization is far more fragile than we often assume. The shift of Wallace from rebel to martyr perfectly demonstrates the unpredictable power of political symbolism. Edward the Found intended the execution to prove the uselessness of defiance, yet it instead forged a strong emblem of honorable sacrifice for one's beliefs. The extreme nature of the punishment contributed to its failure as a warning. The horror was so absolute that it transformed into something almost sublime, going beyond its immediate function to represent a larger meaning. The lasting interest in Wallace's tale reflects our desire for heroes who represent our highest values, especially when they face the harshest suffering. This execution reminds us that the most significant victories are frequently moral rather than physical, that dignity can survive even when everything else is taken away, and that the human spirit can prevail even at the moment the body faces destruction. Ultimately, the story of William Wallace's execution is about the cost of standing firm for one's principles, freedom, and the price of standing by one's beliefs in today's comfortable world of ease can easily be forgotten. The liberties that many accept as natural were earned through the pain and sacrifice of those who lived before us. The brutal death of William Wallace stands as a powerful reminder that freedom is never granted without cost, and those who enjoy it bear the duty to respect the sacrifices of those who gave their lives. As we confront current threats to our liberties and dignity, the tale of Wallace remains deeply significant. Although the tactics have evolved, the core battle between tyranny and freedom persists. Wallace's execution teaches us that some principles justify immense suffering, and some causes deserve the ultimate price. Every generation faces the difficult decision between safeguarding freedom and seeking security. The blood-stained streets of medieval London still whisper a profound truth. Certain ideals are priceless, and the human spirit, even when shattered, can ignite hope in others to persevere through the darkest hours.